welcome back to another episode of the Physiology and Philosophy podcast. Today's episode is round 2 with Dr. Eduardo de Souza, and here we cover everything related to interset stretching and muscle hypertrophy. Edu covers the entirety of the literature here, and we have a very nuanced conversation. We cover some things like its effects on untrained populations as well as trained populations, the effects on different muscle groups, and even different muscle fiber types. It's a very all-encompassing conversation, and by the end of it, my view and applications of interset stretching have actually changed dramatically. So if you're a researcher, or if you're just interested in bodybuilding, or if you're a personal trainer and you've heard about interset stretching, I definitely recommend listening to the entire episode, because in the end, where he really gives sort of his summary on the literature and some practical applications, I really learned a lot from it, quite frankly, and I always enjoy talking to him. Edu has a lot of knowledge to share, and this is hopefully episode 2 of many, and I'll use the same interlude that I did the first time. Without further ado, I give you Edu. Okay, so we are back, and now we're talking about intraset stretching. And again, keeping up with the theme of our previous discussion on volume load, if the first series of episodes with you are talking about, manipulating acute training variables strictly for the focus of hypertrophy, while having an awareness that this might not be the goal for everyone, and that there's a variety of other strength training adaptations that are commonly sought after and beneficial. But for the sake of us, that's what we're talking about now, is manipulating variables for hypertrophy. Intraset stretching is one that I know has been in the literature in some capacity for an extended period of time, but it seems like there's been a sort of a spike and resurgence of this topic in the last 5 or so years, thanks to you and some of your colleagues as well. I was wondering if you could start us off by just giving us a brief history on intraset stretching, how it's applied, and then what's the actual rationale behind its ability to augment muscle growth.
Sure. No, that's a very interesting topic, and I love the. I always share the perspective, some historic perspective about this topic. We all know that bodybuilders, they have been doing interset stretching for decades, right? Like that's a very bodybuilding stuff. But we have the seminal work from Professor Jose Antonio, and with birds, to be more specifically quails, and just for have an idea. So they was a bird design. So one wing was held normally without anything, and then they put one wing of the birds in the tube. Was a, how can I say that, a tubular weight training. Doesn't make sense. They put it to stretch the wing. They put the wing inside the tube and held that. That was held stretched. And then they progressed. That was a loaded. That because the loaded interset stretching stuff came from. And then they progressed the weight of that tube. About I forgot the proportion, but I think the average was 25-30% of the bird's mass. So that's what they did. So pretty much they held the latissimus dorsi, the lats muscle of the wings of the birds, stretched for days, and they were progressing, and the other wing was normal. Guess what they found? Muscle mass increase. Don't know if I'm gonna say that correct, but you talk about 200%.
Wow.
Was huge. Muscle length increased by 70 whatever, and the fiber hyperplasia that is, we don't have any good evidence in humans, but fiber number increased about 30%. So that was everything started, and I think that's what one work. But Professor Jose Antonio, he has like a 2 or 3 seminal. I don't know if you're gonna watch it. If I did the math wrong, but it's about 2-3 papers with the same protocol. So and then I think since then we are trying to implement such intervention in real world, in practical settings. As I was saying, like, bodybuilders have been doing intersect stretching for so long. And then the way you said, and you're correct, I think the last 10 years, we have a boom about intersect stretching studies on muscular adaptations across a variety of populations, but also more recently, we had the studies with just loaded stretching only. So that's where we
Hmm.
at this point. Of course, we're going to discuss the specifics for who that's good for. Is a muscle specific thing, the mechanism behind. Uh, we're going to talk more about that, but just I think that's the perspective, the timeline perspective of the intersect stretching.
Wow. So let me just see if I'm hearing this correctly. So if we were to replicate sort of the design of that bird study in humans, it would essentially be if I was hanging from a pull-up bar for a month, and over the course of that over the course of the month, one arm's hanging, one arm's fine, and then they're adding weight to my feet. So is that sort of the equivalent to what was happening in the birds?
Yes, we trying is a good. If I put that in more practical settings nowadays, you go for pull-ups, right? And then at the end of a last set, you would hold your weight, stretch it, and for after the completion of each set. That would be the way we would apply. So we're trying to find a way that at completion of a set, we can prolong the tension from eccentric by holding the muscle in the stretched position for a little longer. We started that study. I think gave the spark. Like it was, it may have a something. We may have a something there, right?
Yeah.
Of course, with birds, not talk about mammals, but that's. I think your take is a good way. Your take is a very good example for trying to replicate the same study in human. Would be very very similar to what you said. The example that I
Hmm.
gave you was more what you are doing nowadays. You go for
Gotcha.
regular pull-ups. At the end, you would hold your legs in the stretched position. So that would for 30 seconds, something like that.
Okay, I definitely want to talk about ways to practically apply it, but I just wanted to make sure I was understanding sort of the unpractical design that sort of sparked this idea. So uh, you hang for a month with a load, and then in that study they saw roughly 200% growth with the addition of new muscle fibers. So clearly, at least in this population of birds, this extended stretch augmented muscle growth. But now, obviously, obviously that is very not practical. So we're trying to apply maybe the same concept in more of these intraset manners. So if it sounds like instead of a prolonged hold for several days, you mentioned two different ways you could apply this strategy. One is after a rep or a set, you maintain a lengthened position for a given period of time. And am I correct in interpreting that you said there's a new way of applying this as well, where you're just holding a fixed stretch, sort of independent of the concentric eccentric muscle action? Are those sort of the two different ways you can apply this practically?
Yes. You the first one is an intersect stretching, and going back to what you said was like, okay, if a loaded if a loaded stretch works, can we implement loaded stretch in between sets to augment the hypertrophic adaptations? And then we started to come up with practical interventions to prolong the mechanical tension at the end of at completion of a set. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we also we had so many studies in animal models confirming that stretching, and again it goes back how hypertrophy is way more unspecific, because even stretching per se in humans has been shown to increase muscle size, usually they apply loaded stretch, or they have a device they call, I don't recall the number correct, or tosses, and then they hold like they hold pretty much in the they hold the calves muscle in the stretch position, and they call that long lasting stretching. And the is a study. We have a few studies from the same group, and they found, especially in not just in untrained people, but in trained people, that increased size. But again, you talk about long-lasting stretching. You talk about 1 hour stretching just for one muscle group. But again, I think
Wow.
we need. I think there are different takes, right? Yes, stretching can grow muscle even in humans.
Mm-hmm.
Are those protocols practical? Can we use that in practical settings? Those are the other things we need to figure that out.
So from the initial quail bird studies, you just mentioned intraset stretching and long-lasting stretching. And so the long-lasting stretching techniques, you mentioned using a specific device where you hold it for an hour. And then intraset stretching, is this something that you can do for a given period in between reps, or traditionally at the end of a set? In the literature, how is intraset stretching commonly applied?
Yeah. So going back to how we can implement interset stretching. So usually at the end of a set, so you're doing like a calves raise exercise, or you're doing a cable fly exercise. So at the end of your last repetition, instead of dropping the weight or racking the barbell, you would continue stretching in the stretch. You would continue the stretching of the eccentric portion for 20 to 30 seconds, and then you would rest. So again, you would do 4 sets of 10 reps. Let's put a pretty basic. At the end of the 10th repetition, you would hold that stretch for 20, 30 seconds, rack the barbell or the dumbbell, and then you're gonna rest for additional 1.5 minutes or 1 minute. So it's part. So you would use part of your rest interval as for the interset stretching, and then you would continue
Mm-hmm.
for your normal rest interval. So it doesn't add any additional time to your workout, because that's pretty much what you do. Like at the end of you have a 2 minutes in between sets, 30 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds in between the sets would be used for the interset stretching.
Very cool. I definitely have a lot of questions on that. But the first thing, before I dive into the how to apply it and the practical considerations around it, is this something that you do? So you do 4 sets of 10 repetitions. After each set, you hold the stretch, or is this after your last set you hold the stretch?
The studies, the way the studies have conducted is pretty much at the end of each set. So if you have a
Okay,
four,
so
if you have a 4 sets, would you do 30 seconds at the end of each set? You do about 2 minutes of interset stretching for a 4 sets exercise. The study we did, we have a flat bench and incline, and we did at the end of each set. So we did a very long. So the total time on the stretch was quite long, because they were progressing from 3 to all the way to 5 sets at the end. At the end of each set, you would perform the interset stretching. I think what you said, it might be maybe is another thing that is similar to the training volume. Is that a benefit there? We're going to talk about that. But what we know, there is no detrimental effect. So maybe for someone who's not used to, and if you do too much stretch, it hurts. That might hurt your volume in the training session. But what you can do, instead of starting with stretching after each set, you can start stretching at the last set, and then slowly progressing the number of interset stretching in between. The number of interset stretching in between sets. I think it's a little redundant, but it's about that idea.
I gotcha. Before we dive into the intricacies of how you can apply it and all the factors to consider, what does the literature say regarding the effectiveness? So, how much more muscle growth can you expect to see applying this protocol compared to not applying it?
So that's a very good question, Jake. And always it goes back to what I mentioned. Is that is a muscle specific thing? Is a population specific? We're gonna talk more about those details, but it seems that in untrained people, they might benefit from a little bit more muscle mass accrual. So the muscle will grow more when they would add the intersect stretching compared to a traditional resistance training in untrained individuals. I think that's really, really important. Data in untrained. We don't have a to date. No data includes the data from our lab. No data has shown that intersect stretching increases hypertrophic adaptations in trained individuals. So, and then and pretty much who does that? Trained individuals, right? So the trained individuals really enjoy doing that. But again, there is still lacking, in my opinion. I think we have two papers at this point. One from our lab and another paper from a different lab, if I'm not mistaken, from Brazil again, but in trained individuals. And but again, when the muscle is not trained, when the muscle is that naive, would the muscle interpret the signal as more stimulus to grow compared to regular traditional training? Maybe, because if you go back to mechanism, we do have a data in animal models suggesting that potentially the stretching would induce some anabolic pathway activation, leading to protein synthesis responses. But again, is that a muscle? Is a training status? Because the muscle, the muscle, untrained muscle can differ. Even cardio from resistance training gets hard because you do have studies showing cardio grows muscle in untrained people. But again, we do have a data that at this point, intersect stretching might be a viable intervention for untrained people to enhance hypertrophic adaptations. In trained people, that data is lacking because we have two studies with very different protocols. We try to investigate that. I can share more. When you use a barbell exercise, it gets hard to stretch at the end. So we can talk more about that. But again, if you have a data that intersect stretching is a promising intervention at this point, to date, only for untrained.
And how much, roughly, what's the magnitude of improvement in an untrained population?
I think we can say that it is above the minimal detectable difference. Like if you, for example, if untrained muscle grew like 10, and another untrained muscle with intersect stretching grew like 14, we can say that difference they are real different. But is that perceptual when you are from a statical standpoint? That's a very good question. Like, is that perceptual from a statical standpoint? I don't know. Maybe not. But you can say they are actually different. Would that make a difference from physique, athlete performance or show? I don't know. Maybe not.
And I guess just keeping this through the lens of this untrained population now, you mentioned it's above the minimal detectable change. Um, is there a current theory for the mechanism that is responsible for this augmented growth?
Yeah, but again, data is still lacking. But if you combine data from animal models, you need to think that your muscle has mechanical sensors. And we have active and passive mechanical sensors, right? So the muscle can sense active tension when you are actually contracting the muscle, and that would be responsible by the active mechanical sensors, and then the passive mechanical sensors would sense the stretching. And you see some data in animal models. It's all about mechanical tension. If you put that in a simple way, that if intersect stretching augment hypertrophic adaptations, that would be through mechanical tension. And in the way that when you're doing the regular training, you are only activating the sensors for active tension. And with intersect stretching, the other sensors, the passive mechanical sensors, would be activated, and that would lead to anabolic responses, potentially protein synthesis, and long-term muscle growth. But again, that is a very important emphasis. Data is lacking big time when it comes to humans. Okay.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool though. So I think there's in the sort of seminal Schoenfeld mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy paper, it seems that mechanical tension definitely has something to do with muscle growth. And am I correct in interpreting what you said and saying that intraset stretching, at least in an untrained population, is a different way to pull the lever of mechanical tension, where traditionally it's through these coupled concentric eccentric actions, but through potentially a different receptor, this long hold can still stimulate tension? Is that is that logical or no?
It is, and I think that's why that the hypothesis for the passive mechanical sensors gets a little stronger. And again, if you go back to mechanical tension, how can you activate mechanical tension? Heavy weights, but fatigue, proximity to failure. So there are different ways that mechanical tension can be sensed by the muscle, and I think it might be the same rationale for intersect stretching. Potentially for an untrained muscle, the mechanical sensors that come at play might be a little bit different, and that would be interpreted as a bigger threat or signal to grow in a different way. Is We're gonna talk about whether or not that's muscle specific or exercise or population. No, we still talk about untrained, and I gave the hint already that it might be something for untrained. But it seems that in exercises that allow you to prolong the residual effect of a eccentric, you'd benefit. So because 95% of studies that found positive effects, they look at one muscle group, calves. That because I keep pointing out, is that a muscle specific thing? Because calves are very interesting muscle to study because you have a muscle that's very slow twitch dominant compared to other muscles that are more fast twitch dominant. But again, I think you are take about the muscles sensing a little differently the combination of stretching and resistance training compared to resistance training alone makes sense. And as I added, it seems that in exercise that allow you to prolong the residual effect. How am I gonna put it that prolong the eccentric, the residual effect of that mechanical tension induced by eccentric contraction. I don't know if does that make sense.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to pick up on something you said. So most of the studies on this topic are done in the calf, and correct me if I'm wrong here, and I'm willing to be embarrassed, but two major muscle groups of the calf, we have the gastroc and the soleus, and the soleus is predominantly type 1 orientation, and the gastroc is type 2. Are they seeing these muscle thickness or augmented muscle growth in both of these muscles, or is it just in the gastroc?
I'm not going to embarrass you, but
Did I
just
reverse
to
it?
yes, is pretty much that
So
is
the
it.
soleus is type 2, And the
Now,
gastroc is type 1?
no, you're correct. But the growth is
Oh, okay.
primary on soleus. So
Okay. So
is
I was right
intersect
in the question. Cool.
does intersect? That's a question we don't know. Does intersect stretching induce a fiber type specific adaptation? Because the study we did with a Brad was a very well controlled design. We worked together and we found that if intersect stretching added a benefit, soleus, slow twitch, not in the gastro. And we look at the both heads, the medial and lateral heads. And again, nothing took place in the gastro muscles. So, but just
Even
going
in
back
untrained.
in untrained, the study we did with Brad was in untrained people, kind of not a sedentary individuals, people who like a how gonna say that, like college students who do sports, they're walking around or something like that. But and just going back to the beginning of our question, it is really important to point it out, like the studies from the orthosis devices that they hold in they hold the calves in the stretch position, or the studies with intersect stretching. 95 or 97 of those studies only look at calves muscle group. So we were the only that look at chest. We look at the pec thickness, right? And we in trained people. So yeah, but there's a question after that study: does stretchy induce fiber type specific adaptations, or we only see a benefit which you can prolong use the same load and prolong the eccentric contraction? Because that's if you do like a calves raise with your body weight, if you do on the leg press, if you do a seated, you can pretty much use the same load, right? How you gonna
Yeah.
do that? How you gonna do that with a dumbbell fly? I wouldn't do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't do with a dumbbell fly. Like okay, now I'm going to stretch. Like I don't know.
This excites me on a lot of levels, and I want to come back to some specific questions that I have for you, but I feel like an important aside just to mention is I feel like all too often one animal study will get extrapolated to all of these different applications, and people will commonly reference it. And if you just looked at the study, you could say stretching increases growth by 200%.
And that's
And
a
I think
correct
this
take,
is
right?
a great example of it is likely not going to be the same in humans. And it sounds like from what you're saying, it's different between trained and untrained and muscle groups and fiber types. So I think this concept or topic of intraset stretching is what's key to having nuanced conversations and discussions before broadly recommending something or broadly applying it. Because I've seen articles, bodybuilding.com and different Twitter threads where people read the abstract and they just start putting in their training protocol. So I think as researchers and practitioners, it's on us to accurately display the confidence and the applications of a given finding. Just as an aside, but now I want to come back to some specific questions just to make sure if I was picking up what you're saying. So most of the studies done on intraset stretching were performed on the calf muscle and in untrained individuals, and they
Correct.
saw greater adaptations in type 1 muscle fibers compared to type 2. Is that a decent summary so far?
They saw greater thickness adaptations in the soleus. That's more uh, slow twitch dominant. That's correct.
Is there any other studies done? You mentioned one on the pec. Is there any other literature that has looked at different muscle groups or exercises to do intraset stretching, not long stretching?
No, yes, uh, we did it too, right? I have a collaboration with Dr. Evangelista from Brazil, and we saw when we sum out the muscle thickness sites, we saw the sum was greater, right? The adaptation from the sum of thickness was better for intersect stretching, but that was pretty much as a byproduct of a lower body. And that time we look at vastus lateralis muscle, but it seems that nothing happened to upper body, and we found something. That was the first study in untrained, and a lot of people talk about that study. It was like when the study came out, was like a big buzz, like everybody talking about the study, intersect stretching. I think somehow we help people using something that works for untrained, not for trained. And since that paper, we were excited to do a paper with a study with a trained people. But again, we had to move the bench press close to the cable fly machine because with the barbell, we can stretch, right? Because the barbell touch your chest, you can't go beyond that point of stretching. And then we move the cable fly close to the bench press. And then once they finish, we did a lot of piloting to figure that out. How much load, like relative to the working set, what percentage from the working set could be used for the cable fly. And we found that was about 15. We tried 15, 20, whatever. And above 20, people were complaining about shoulder pain. But again, it is also important to say that every study that found positive effect in untrained, they pretty much prolonged the load of the eccentric. So they were doing the same exercise, the same load, the load used during the work set, and at the end of the set, they held the stretch. So what we did, we were not able to use the same load of exercise. It would be dangerous. We have a guys who are able to bench 1.4 times their body mass. So we have a lot of people benching for reps close to 200, 200 something. How are you going to stretch that and then we use a cable fly. Uh, Again, I definitely think we need more studies in trained population. But what you said is a perfect take about the state of art of intersect stretching, and who would benefit from such intervention.
And then the first study you mentioned, they found added benefit in the lower body, but they didn't find any benefit in the upper body.
Yeah, we compared we compared sum of thickness. We have we have a biceps, triceps, and VL thickness. And instead of looking at individual sites, we group the sites and you compare the sum of pre sites, right? The three spots, the sum of three spots at pre versus the sum of the three spots at the post testing. And we found that the sum was different. But when you look a little deeper, like probably was the VL, because the VL we saw the biggest difference between the interset stretching compared to traditional resistance training. But then when the studies look at individual muscle groups, the study we did for Brad, uh, gastro muscle growth was very, very similar between interset stretching and traditional resistance training, but only soleus we found difference.
Wow. And
It's still, to be honest, I think we have a way more unknowns than we have way more question about. I think you mentioned that already, and I totally agree for you. At this point, I have more questions about interset stretching than answers to share with your audience at this point.
what were the findings of that bench press and pec fly study? Was there any added benefit?
No benefit. So they got stronger. They got stronger. The muscle got thicker. The pack, we measure just one dimension of a muscle growth. But good thing though, and that we can apply to every study to date. No study has reported any detrimental effect of an intersect stretching. It's also important to say that it seems that untrained people, they struggle to keep their volume when they do stretching.
Okay.
When they do stretching between sets, it seems that they struggle, and the volume load, for example, the study we did with the calves muscle group, volume load was different. So untrained people doing intersect stretching did lower volume, but the muscle grew more, the soleus, right? So they did less, lower volume load. And then the study we did in train, they handled, the volume was pretty, the first two sessions, first two training sessions, volume was a little lower, but they literally caught up throughout the study. They got there, and no difference in volume load.
Wow, I have so many questions here. I'll try to organize my thoughts a little bit, but from our previous discussion, we sort of identified, at least in this lower to middle threshold, the importance of volume for hypertrophy. So if anyone is applying this and they're finding that their volume load is significantly reducing because of this strategy, then it although you haven't identified any detrimental effects, there's a case in which it could be. And one thing that scares me is that, to me, if we talk about, training techniques, this sounds like a very much advanced training technique. And it also sounds like the group that is going to have a positive response are untrained individuals.
Who doesn't,
And I
who
think you have to
don't
be,
need the advanced techniques.
yeah. So that they don't need advanced techniques, and they also have to be careful in holding certain positions for an extended period of time. So I don't know if you, and the irony is that these advancedly trained populations are the ones performing these techniques the most, and they may not see added benefit in, from your example, in the pec. So I think is some factors you have to consider. If for some reason, if say you're a personal trainer listening to this and you're looking to spice up a session with an untrained population, or if they came to you and wanted to apply it, it would be my recommendation that you don't, if you're untrained, you don't read an article on bodybuilding.com and hold 50-pound dumbbells in between sets. I think you should probably start with the basics, or have a professional who can guide you through implementing one of these protocols safely. And I think for trained individuals, I hope more research is done to really start to tease out if there's muscle specific adaptations or fiber type specific adaptations. But from what you're telling me, it sounds like there's a potential rationale for increasing mechanical tension, but the impact that has on volume load and muscle growth is not clearly defined for a trained population. Is that a safe summary?
It is. It is. I just where do I sign? So
No, this is
I agree. Is yeah, it's very interesting that, as you said, it is advanced people. They do those advanced techniques, and sometimes we only studies, and for so much long, the quails study was used as a support for intersect stretching. And then sometimes we have usually for those media platforms you mentioned, they sometimes, again, nothing against the goal, the approach, but sometimes they need to tell what their audience wants to hear. And sometimes we wanna do studies to back up and confirm some biases, but that, because it's really really important. It's not about saying study is bad or good. It is understand the intrinsics of a study, and where can I apply, can I generalize these results to untrained, trained individuals. But to be honest, when it comes to trained, we don't have any data that supports intersect stretching for trained. Again, no detrimental effect. Do we like, because think about that, especially for the squat, sometimes is not sometimes not a muscle strength issue. Sometimes people, they have a poor ankle mobility, they have a weak core, and those two factors preclude them from progressing. So I would love to see a study that people with a poor mobility, if they do like the calf stretching, if they do the ankle mobility or the loaded stretch, would that enhance that strength performance? Because
Huh.
that's something, again, so many people, their problem with squats sometimes is weak core, poor mobility of lower body joints, and the good thing about interset stretching is it doesn't add any additional time, so it is efficient. It goes back to the volume load. We observe similar adaptations for one muscle group, and the other muscle group, we found a better hypertrophic adaptation for soleus at the expense of a lower volume. So it was more efficient because they did a lower work and they had a similar outcomes. So again, there is something else when it comes to stretching, and that's more based on the stretching only exercises. We know that usually women are more flexible than men, and
Hmm.
those studies, when they were able to compare, to use sex as a factor, they found that women did not benefit from stretching inducing growth because they're already
Wow.
flexible, and seems that stretching doesn't add any tension because they are more flexible. So again,
Oh,
and that's another thing you need to do better. Like I'm really excited. The next study, we're going to be able to use males and females, and potentially using the sex as a factor to see if that explains some differences or the lack of differences. But yeah, so no
wow.
data for trained people. I wish I had something, but that's what data is, right? Sometimes.
You're blowing my mind here. So outside of the what I propose as its effects on muscle hypertrophy, you're saying that it could be used beneficially for improving mobility, which could allow you to improve your squat form, which could help you augment growth and potentially strength down the road. But also, I think it's important to, when we talk about any concept as it relates to strength training, identify if there is a sex effect, and if we have any reason to believe that one may respond better or differently than another. And for you to add that in there in the end, I think is definitely important. And I applaud anyone who tries to add more of literature in women into the field, because I know that it's significantly lacking there. Um, I do. We are at 1 minute, 1 hour and 40 minutes, and I promised my fiance that she said she'd listen to every episode as long as I kept them under an hour. So far we've she's not going to
Oh
make it
my.
this far. Is it okay with you if we save concurrent training for another recording? I want to do that topic justice. Are you okay with that?
Sure. No, yeah, that's totally fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah, because those, again, as I told you, you picked the three topics I really like, and yeah, we could go on and on talk about the first two, right? That we
Yeah.
could spend more time talk about volume, interset stretching. Uh, Concurrent is a very interesting topic as well. We can save that for if this episode doesn't ruin your audience, and we can go for a second one with a
Hey,
concurrent for sure.
I'm gonna I'm gonna schedule for follow up no matter what, because I find it interesting and I know that other people will as well. But before you leave today, I have one question here on this platform that I ask every guest who's been on so far before they leave. Not necessarily related to what do we discuss further, and you can answer it as long or short as you want. But if you were given 3 to 5 minutes in a national recording, or for you, a worldwide recording where everyone in the world is listening to you, do you have a message that you would like to share? It could be related to health, spirituality, well-being. Is there anything that you feel that the world would benefit from hearing from you?
Oh man, we are. you're in the interesting place at this point, right? Maybe my message, I don't know, like maybe my message is more related to the things I believe and the type of work I do. So yeah, so I think I would tell people to start off, be kind, uh, listen to other people, hear what they have to say, and bias, regardless of direction, is bad, right? So bias always is bad regardless of direction. So I think we need to approach every situation with open mind and the willingness to learn from others. I think that would build strong connection, foster understanding, which is missing big time, and would build a better word for everyone. I think is always against bias. I think that's be kind. Bias is bad. Be willing to listen to other and learn from every situation. Open mind, listen from
Wow,
others, learn from others. The world will be a better place for everyone.
I
It's how
do.
I see it.
Thank you so much for your time today in the physiology space, but also in the sort of worldwide empowerment space as well. I love that message, and I'm in a better mood, and I feel more optimistic to know that there's people like you out there. So thank you. I appreciate you, and I hope to have you on here again soon.
No, thank you. Thanks again for having me. It was a conversation between friends. I truly enjoy it. Thanks so much again. And whenever you want to hear from me again, you know where you can find me. Thanks.
Okay, sounds great. I'm gonna end the recording.